The 3-meter-tall wrought iron gate of the Langford estate slowly swung open, revealing a long cobblestone driveway that led into a world most people only glimpsed in high-end architectural magazines. 2 rows of ancient oak trees stood silent on either side, like solemn sentinels guarding a lineage. The golden light from crystal chandeliers on the main house's porch cast a majestic and exacting atmosphere, as if everything here had been curated, measured, and judged. A black Mercedes rolled to a halt at the front steps. Its door opened slowly. Renee Caldwell stepped out with the calm composure of someone far too familiar with rooms of power and with rooms that had never welcomed her presence. At 40, Renee was a phenomenon. CEO and founder of a tech company leading the global AI race, she had been featured by Forbes, Bloomberg, and Harvard Business Review as the new face of global leadership. Her success wasn't inherited or lucky. It was carved out through thousands of hours toiling in the dark, hundreds of rejections, and countless moments of being underestimated simply for being a woman. And black. Tonight she had been invited to a party hosted by the Langford family, one of the most powerful names in the luxury goods industry, under the pretense of a celebration before finalizing a $500 million partnership. On paper, it was a courtesy. In truth, it was the final test, not one found in any clause, but in glances, tones of voice, how one raised their glass, or how someone subtly looked at their watch while she was speaking. Renee knew the rules. How many of these events had she attended? Enough to understand that real power often wasn't sealed with signatures, but with subtle judgments, silent verdicts about whether or not she fit the part. The white dress of the woman stepping off the stone stairs fluttered gently in the breeze. A gloved staff member bowed and ushered Renee into the main hall. Inside, the soft hum of a violin filled the space, delicate enough to patch the silence between surface-level conversations. On the walls, large oil paintings of past Langford generations looked down at guests with expressions of absolute confidence or well-worn arrogance. "Good evening, Miss Caldwell," said an older gentleman with a smile and a British accent smooth as aged wine. "Mr. Gregory is waiting for you in the ballroom." Renee nodded, offering a smile that was perfectly measured. Not overly warm, not too cold, just enough. It was a skill she had perfected after years of standing among people who always saw her presence as an interesting exception. The towering mahogany doors opened into the main ballroom, where the party was already in full swing. Faint conversation buzzed. Glasses clinked softly, and high heels tapped lightly against the marble floor, blending into a quiet symphony of old habits and inherited status. She stepped inside, and in that precise moment the air shifted. Subtly, briefly. But she felt it like a chill brushing across the back of her neck when someone cracked open a window. Eyes turned toward her, and a few widened slightly. An older woman wearing 3 strands of pearls leaned toward her neighbor, whispered something, and chuckled. A man near the fireplace raised an eyebrow and turned away as if he had just smelled something unfamiliar. Renee kept walking. Her heels tapped like quiet war drums on the marble floor. She had been the other in so many rooms. But this time, the difference wasn't only her gender or skin color, it was her power. They knew who she was. They knew her company was on the verge of an IPO with a towering valuation. They knew that even the Langford family, known for their aloof exclusivity, had extended an invitation. And perhaps that's precisely what made them uncomfortable rather than impressed. At the head table, Trent Langford Jr., sole heir to the family empire, was telling a story that had the group around him laughing aloud. When he noticed Renee approaching, he turned, his smile lingering at the corners of his mouth. His gaze swept over her, not the way a man looks at a woman, but the way a man accustomed to judging things sizes up an object in front of him. Renee had seen that look before, in boardrooms, elevators, and sometimes in the mirror. She walked closer. A server was mid-pour with a wine bottle when he froze, unsure whether to move left or right. Confusion drifted through the air like a veil of smoke in that fleeting second. Then a voice cut through, light, sharp, and dripping with subtext. "Oh, the help arrived early." The sentence crashed into the room like a glass dropped onto marble. No one laughed outright, but everyone heard it. Trent Langford Jr., with his hair slicked back in a classic style, dressed in a white tuxedo and sporting a Patek Philippe as a badge of status, stared directly at Renee as he delivered the line. He didn't laugh. He curled his lip into a faint smirk, his eyes deliberately watching, testing. And shockingly, the room responded just as he'd hoped. Some chuckled. Others let out awkward, forced smiles, averting their eyes, as if pretending it was a poorly timed joke. A middle-aged man took a sip of his drink and gave a soft nod, as though silently saying, "Sure, a bit much, but hey, just a joke." No one stopped him. No one said, "Trent, that's out of line." No one stood up, shifted the conversation, or changed the subject to ease the growing tension. Even Gregory Langford, the man hailed in the press as the architect of the Langford legacy, dipped his head toward his glass, pretending to examine the hue of his wine through baccarat crystal. Renee stood still. She didn't feel anger, at least not yet. What she felt was observation. Her eyes slowly scanned each face at the table. Not in search of an ally, but to remember the silence. Silence that spoke louder than anything else in that room. She had just been deliberately humiliated in front of dozens at an event supposedly meant to honor her as a strategic partner. And the most painful part, none of them saw it as unusual. The server stood there, arms suspended mid-air, glancing toward her for direction. His eyes were full of confusion, almost as if he were the one being mocked and unsure whether he should apologize or vanish. Renee turned to him and said loud enough for the entire table, "It's all right, I can handle myself." Her voice was gentle, but each word sliced clean through the room like a razor through silk. Then she turned toward Trent, giving him a thin smile, polite to the point of cruelty. Quite the classic joke, Trent. Perhaps a bit outdated, but it reflects this place's spirit rather well. Her words weren't loud, but the entire table went suddenly quiet. Someone cleared their throat. The woman in pearls pretended to adjust her napkin. A gentleman gave a tight, awkward smile like he'd just bitten into something sharp. Trent shrugged as if he genuinely didn't care. It was as if newcomers were expected to endure hazing like a rite of passage. Renee said nothing more. She turned slowly back toward the head table where a chair had been set aside just for her. But she didn't sit. She rested a hand lightly on the backrest and glanced down at the glass of champagne already poured for her, a drink sparkling like gold, but now looking strangely cheap. She picked it up. People assumed she might give a toast. But no, she gently set the glass back down without taking a sip and said, "Seems tonight's dinner comes with a little seasoning I didn't order." The smile remained, but this time there was fire in her eyes, the light of someone who had endured far too much, yet still chose to stand tall. She didn't need to say more. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, tapped the screen as if checking the time, and everyone understood. "I no longer have time for this." Renee turned and walked toward the door like someone leaving a meeting without a contract left to sign. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She walked like a woman who had just made a significant decision, and she had. The doors closed behind her, and the ballroom felt like it had lost all air. Only the faint clink of a spoon against glass and a few scattered murmurs remained. A young entrepreneur seated at a side table leaned toward his companion and asked, "Who was that?" And the reply came in a breath. "She's the one who just walked away from $500 million without blinking." The night wind picked up in the courtyard, rustling a few petals from the white rose trellises lining the hall. Renee stepped into her car, closed the door, and stared silently out the window at the brightly lit mansion, a cold light that felt almost hollow. Her driver didn't ask anything. He was used to this. Only one sentence came from her lips, barely audible. "That's enough." The car glided through a neighborhood of wealth and silence where every house had security cameras, but no one looked at each other. Renee sat still in the back seat, the rhythm of streetlights flickering past like a black and white film reel. No one spoke, no one needed to. She removed her small, elegant diamond studs, a gift she once gave herself the year she shattered her first revenue ceiling. But tonight even their glint felt weary. Her fingers brushed the collar of her tailored suit. The sharp, structured cut that once made her feel invincible now pressed against her neck, suffocating. It was as if, despite the perfection of every seam, something inside her had quietly cracked. Renee had been through worse. Blunt rejections. Boardroom entrances are mistaken for the coffee girl. She had once been fired without explanation for confronting a male executive who harassed a female colleague and warned she was too emotional to lead. She had pitched for capital in the early days of her startup, facing a line of white male investors, one of whom asked, "Do you think you might be a bit aggressive for a CEO?" None of them remembered her name, but she remembered every face. Tonight at the Langford table, all of those memories returned uninvited. But this time, it wasn't an implication or a glance. It was open humiliation. Trent Langford Jr. hadn't just insulted her, he tested the room's boundaries, and the room had done nothing. That hurt more than the insult itself. She never wanted pity, never. But part of her had hoped that respect would at least be the baseline in the most potent, opulent rooms. Tonight she learned she was wrong. Renee didn't turn on the lights when she returned to her penthouse. She let the glow of the city spill through the glass wall, casting cold constellations across the black stone of her living room. She poured herself a glass of water. No wine, her mind needed clarity. She sank into the couch. Her heels dropped to the hardwood floor, the soft clack sounding like a sigh. Her phone vibrated with a message from her legal assistant, "Langford contract draft final version ready for review." She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened her laptop and navigated to the termination clause. A blinking red highlight appeared under Clause 9.3. Either party may withdraw from the agreement unilaterally before formal signing without legal liability. Freedom. One simple sentence. But tonight it meant an honorable exit. She clicked save, closed the laptop, and sat still. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about the money, the media, the impact on investors, shareholders, or company valuation. She was thinking about a 9-year-old girl who once cried outside a bookstore after being kicked out by a guard for not looking like a customer. That little girl had once wished, "One day I'll walk through any door without being asked, 'Where do you think you're going?'" And now she had. But in Langford's room, she realized people still wanted to keep the doors closed. She picked up her phone and opened her calendar. The press conference about the deal scheduled for early next week was still there. Her finger paused, then tapped edit. No longer a collaboration announcement, no more celebration. She typed just one line, "Official statement from CEO Renee Caldwell on the decision to decline the partnership." She hit confirm. In that moment, she didn't feel angry. She didn't feel victorious. She just felt light. No cameras caught the moment, no applause, no one called her brave. But for Renee, it was one of the most powerful decisions of her life. Power doesn't always live in the signature on a contract. Sometimes it lives in the decision to walk away. The next morning, the Langford offices were lit as usual. Staff arrived on time, espressos brewed, secretaries printed schedules. No one looked worried, and no serious news circulated. The previous night's event was described as elegant, pleasant, and if anything awkward had occurred, it was a joke poorly timed. In an internal email, the head of communications wrote, "Nothing to worry about. Ms. Caldwell is just a bit sensitive. Give it a few days." At a polished round table, Trent Langford Jr. retold the story like a funny anecdote, complete with the same dismissive shrug etched into his DNA. "Honestly, people walk on eggshells now. You make one joke and suddenly you're the villain. She should learn to take it like an adult." The room chuckled softly. Not loud, not wild, but just enough to preserve the toxic consensus. They were used to the silence that followed every cruel remark, accustomed to money status and relationships smoothing over any crack. And they believed, like before, that Renee would stay quiet. Because who would walk away from a $500 million deal? Who would risk their name shares and future over a single insult, even a public one? They forgot one thing: Renee Caldwell was never like everyone else. At that same hour, the air was entirely different on the top floor of Caldwell Tech headquarters. Renee arrived early, no coffee, no music, just silence for decision-making. She called an unscheduled meeting with legal communications and strategy. No advance notice. But when they saw her expression, no one asked why. She stood before the glass wall, black marker in hand, and wrote 3 bold words: "Dignity equals non-negotiable." Then she turned to face the room. "Langford behaved as if we needed them, but we don't need anyone who doesn't respect us." A beat of silence, then her instructions: "Cease all negotiation processes. Prepare an emergency press conference within 48 hours. Draft a short, clear, and unapologetic statement withdrawing from the deal. Do not allow Langford to interfere or reopen talks." Her team, veterans of IPOs, mergers, and crisis management, sat quietly for a few seconds and nodded individually. They knew this wasn't just business. This was a declaration, a boundary, a warning. No one asked, "Are you sure?" No one said, "What if the market reacts poorly?" Because everyone understood holding the line is never the cheap choice, but it is the only one when self-respect is on the line. When the meeting ended, Renee didn't feel triumphant. She didn't need to. She felt clear that every choice she had made, from standing alone before biased investors to building a company on cultural integrity, led to this moment. If she stayed silent, she'd message everyone watching her that dignity was up for negotiation. And to Renee, that was unacceptable. As the PR team prepared the official statement that afternoon, a young team member approached her. A server from the party had reached out via internal email. His name was Jalen. He had recorded the entire scene in the ballroom, not for scandal, but because he couldn't bear to watch it happen and see no one act. He wrote, "I know I'm just a temp, but I couldn't stay quiet. I didn't film it for money. I just thought I'd be like them if I didn't speak up." Renee read the email more than once, her eyes closed softly, not out of fatigue, but because it struck the very belief she'd always held: silence is the choice of the strong, but only when it protects what's right. When silence becomes complicity, even the smallest voice can start a wave. That night, Renee stood alone in her office, overlooking a light-filled city. She held a printed copy of the statement she was about to deliver to the press. It was only 93 words, no flourishes, no accusations, just the truth. And no regret. The next day, the world would know Renee Caldwell does not accept insults disguised as part of company culture, no matter the cost. That day, an unusual crowd of financial media gathered outside Renee Caldwell's company headquarters. There had been no official notice, no flashy press invites, but a single early morning internal leak was enough to send the market stirring. The CEO of Caldwell Tech will hold an emergency press conference regarding the Langford deal. Speculation swirled, perhaps it was the formal signing, maybe a renegotiation or a pivotal shift in IPO strategy. No one predicted what was truly about to unfold. Inside the briefing room, camera lights beamed down like direct sunlight. Renee stepped in without an entourage, a towering LED backdrop, or a grand introduction video. Just her. Alone. In a cream-colored blazer, minimalist skirt, her hair neatly tied up, eyes steady and unflinching. She stood behind a wooden podium, no notes needed. She had memorized every word, each chosen with the same care she gave her beliefs. Cameras rolled, the microphone waited. She looked directly at the front row, journalists, shareholders, partners, investors, and her employees. Then her voice rang out clear, firm, unwavering, unapologetic, and direct. When a person is insulted for their race, gender, or background, it is no longer a personal matter. It is a systemic issue. Last night, as a business partner, I was publicly mocked in front of dozens. And no one spoke up. A $500 million deal can never compensate for the silence of an entire room. Therefore, I formally announce that Caldwell Tech is withdrawing immediately from all negotiations with the Langford Group. The air in the room froze. No one asked questions. No camera clicked. It took a few seconds before the entire room seemed to awaken. Questions poured out like a breached dam. Are you walking away from the biggest deal of the year? Are you concerned about shareholder reactions? Is this a deliberate media strategy? Renee listened, but instead of addressing each question, she said one final thing. Dignity is not negotiable. I am not here to teach anyone a lesson. I am here to remind myself that I must never trade away the one thing that matters most. She bowed slightly, then stepped away from the podium. At that moment, her communications team, who had worked silently for 2 nights, published the official statement across all company platforms and emailed it to all relevant parties, investors, legal advisors, and strategic partners. A 93-word declaration precisely as she had written the night before. No edits, no justifications. Within 30 minutes, social media erupted. A business columnist tweeted, "Caldwell just rejected $500 million over a racist joke. Business history is shifting right before our eyes." A female influencer commented, "This isn't rebellion, this is the new standard, when a woman knows how to stand and stand alone." The hashtag #respect is priceless began trending on Twitter, then on LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok. A 20-second press conference clip featuring Renee's statement with subtitles was shared over 2 million times in the first 6 hours. Inside Langford's internal network, chaos broke loose. The board called an emergency meeting. PR spiraled out of control. Partners called non-stop, demanding explanations. Several sub-brands were quickly labeled outdated by younger consumers. Langford's stock dropped 7% by the end of the morning session and continued its freefall after a leaked party video hit the internet just hours later. In the video by server Jalen, the words, "Who let the help in?" early rang out clearly, followed by the deafening silence of the entire room. There was no room for denial. As for Renee, she didn't speak further. No interviews, no talk show inspirational guest appearances. She returned to her office and reviewed the portfolios of other interested partners. Young, innovative companies led by people who listened and genuinely wanted change. She scheduled 3 new meetings for the upcoming week. No more compromise, only deliberate choices. Renee understood she hadn't dismantled a system overnight, but she had created the first crack sharp, clean, and impossible to ignore. By the time the sun had set on the press conference day, the name Renee Caldwell was trending across every media platform. From major headlines, CEO rejects $500 million deal over public insult, to her dignity. Financial Times. No one stood up, so she walked out. The Guardian. Renee Caldwell redefines what success means. Harvard Business Review to sharp, pointed tweets. She didn't need to shout, she just walked away, and an empire began to shake. At Bold Women Lead. When the video from the gala filmed by Jalen, the catering staff, began circulating, the social media storm truly exploded. In the clip, Trent Langford Jr.'s voice cut through the room like a blade. Oh, the help showed up early. Then silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. Then Renee stood up still with a faint smile, but her eyes had lost all patience. No narration needed, no dramatic edits. The truth was raw enough. On TikTok, a slowed-down version of that moment, set to a classical symphony, was overlaid with text, "This is the sound of real power walking away." It reached 4 million views within 12 hours. Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. Every platform erupted with hashtags. #respect is priceless. #Renee did right. #walk away with dignity. #boycott. Langford posts poured in, not just from journalists, but from entrepreneurs, artists, activists, and everyday users. Renee doesn't just represent women of color, she represents anyone who's ever had to smile through an insult to keep a chance. A startup founder shared. I stayed silent once when my boss made a sexist joke in a meeting. Today I apologize to myself and thank Renee, a mid-level manager wrote on LinkedIn. That same night, Langford's PR team descended into full-blown crisis. Analytics showed a massive spike in negative keywords associated with Langford Group. Toxic culture, outdated values, elitism, racism in luxury. More than 140 million negative impressions were recorded in just 36 hours. Langford's stock began to plummet. Day 1, 7%, Day 2, 11.5%, Day 3, 18.2%. Major investors demanded emergency meetings. Strategic partners paused negotiations. Subsidiary brands experienced a wave of order cancellations, particularly among younger consumers who buy with values, not just logos. Due to overwhelming public backlash, Langford's official website had to shut down its latest news section. Their initial apology statement was deemed soulless, legalese, and notably void of the word racism. A Reddit post from a former Langford employee shot to the top of the business subreddit. I worked there. What happened to Renee doesn't surprise me. The only difference this time, there was a camera. As for Jalen, the quiet justice whistleblower, he was hailed across the internet. A GoFundMe campaign launched by supporters raised over $40,000 in just 2 days. He posted a straightforward message to his ex account, "I did the right thing. Renee did the rest." Amid the storm, Renee said nothing more. No interviews, no television appearances, no victory lap, no boycott calls. She stayed silent and let the numbers, the actions, and the world's response speak for her. This wasn't a retreat, it was a strategy. Because when someone understands the weight of each step, they don't need noise to lead. At the same time, Renee's company received 14 new partnership invitations from international organizations, global investment funds, and major corporations, all emphasizing shared values of human dignity, inclusive culture, and respect-based collaboration. In under 72 hours, Renee had flipped the board entirely. There were no compromises, no renegotiations, just a timely exit head held high. From the top floor of Caldwell Tech headquarters, Renee Caldwell looked out over the city. The glass towers reflected the early sunlight, and the people flowing past below resembled data streams, steady, indifferent, and unmoved by any one individual. Her phone continued to light up with notifications. The PR team sent hourly updates of over 100 interview requests from news networks, podcasts, and magazines. Universities invited her to give lectures. Feminist organizations proposed campaign collaborations. She didn't respond to a single one, not because she was avoiding them, but because she had said enough. She had delivered the most crucial message not in a press conference, but through action. She walked away. People could figure out everything else on their own. In a world where outrage is often treated as proof of conviction, Renee chose the opposite. No anger, no attacks, no personal accusations. She did not mention Trent Langford Jr. by name, and she never revisited the specifics of the incident to make a point. She didn't need to, because what mattered most wasn't in someone's name, but in the silence of an entire room, and in the decision of one person to stand up. Many had claimed silence was weakness, evasion, a way to let others dominate. Renee disagreed. Silence, when purposeful, is power. It forces others to face the reflection of their actions without noise to justify or a rebuttal to defend. And that silence ironically traveled further than any speech ever could. In the days that followed, several attendees from that dinner party began sending personal letters of apology. Many admitted, "I saw what happened, but I did nothing. I stayed silent out of fear, out of politeness, out of deference to power, and now I realize I was complicit." Renee read every letter. She responded to all of them with one sentence: "I don't need your apology. I need you not to stay silent the next time." She held no second press conference, no 10 lessons learned piece was posted, no crying selfies or motivational team huddles. She did the only thing that mattered. It worked. They continued building. They continued choosing partners who didn't need a lesson in respect because they already understood. One of Europe's leading conglomerates, previously declined by Renee for lack of transparency, reached out again. This time, they didn't send a chief commercial officer. They sent the CEO herself, a brown-skinned woman who advocated educational equity before entering finance. The meeting lasted just 40 minutes, but afterward, Renee sent a one-line message to her assistant. "Begin partner due diligence. This one might be the right fit." In an internal meeting, the company's CFO quietly told Renee, "I've never seen stock prices rise just because the public trusts us more, but that's what's happening." She just smiled, said nothing. That night, an email landed in her inbox. It was from Jalen, the waiter who had filmed the infamous video. He wrote a single sentence: "Thank you for not using the video to shame but to awaken." Renee never needed to defeat anyone. She only needed to stay true to herself and offer others watching a model outside of humiliation or retaliation. This was not a victory through scandal. It was a quiet rise powerful enough to collapse an unjust structure. Weeks later, Renee was seen walking into a university in Chicago, the one she had once dreamed of attending, but she couldn't because of a lack of scholarships. This time she wasn't there to apply. She was the keynote speaker at the Global Leadership Summit. Her chosen topic, you don't have to shout to be heard when silence is power. The main auditorium was packed, and the front rows were filled with CEOs, scholars, and young founders. Rows in the back held students, faces bright with curiosity. Notebooks open and eyes fixed on the stage with an expectant intensity. A single LED screen scrolled white letters on a black background. No frills. Renee Caldwell, keynote speaker. The cost of dignity. No grand intro music. No lengthy MC speech. Renee walked on stage like always, steady, simple, needing no spectacle to fill the space. She didn't wear a blazer, just a black V-neck dress and small earrings. She hadn't come to impress. She came to speak the truth. She began her voice low, clear, without theatrics. I used to believe that being good at your work would earn you respect. Then I learned something more complicated. Sometimes dignity doesn't come from how others treat you, it comes from refusing to accept how they do. The room fell utterly silent. She recounted the dinner incident not by naming names, replaying the insult, or reopening wounds. She spoke like someone writing the final chapter of an old story, not to avenge but to release. Then she looked toward the rows of students. You don't need to remember my name. I only hope that one day if you walk into a room and feel like you don't belong there, you'll still take your seat, speak, or if you must, stand and walk out. Without regret. Applause erupted, then paused, not because it ended, but because something caught in the crowd. Many didn't clap. They sat there looking up as if seeing a braver version of themselves take shape before them. After the talk, Renee didn't retreat to a VIP room. She walked straight into the hallway where a line of students waited, each with a notebook. A question, a need to say something to the woman who had shifted something inside them. A young brown girl with bright eyes said when it was her turn, "You didn't just help me believe I could be a leader. You helped me realize I deserve respect even before I become anyone." Renee held her hand gently and said, "And you never need anyone's permission to believe that. Never." A month later, something unexpected happened. While the Langford scandal was still unresolved, top business schools worldwide began incorporating Renee's story into their curriculum, not as a media case study, but as an ethical leadership scenario. In one classroom at Wharton, a student scrawled across the whiteboard, "Success means nothing if it costs you who you are." Renee Caldwell. After 3 waves of PR crises, Langford Group quietly withdrew from the North American market. Their stock recovered slightly, but their reputation did not. Gregory Langford announced his early retirement. Trent Jr. disappeared from the board. He was never mentioned again at public events. No scandal, no lawsuits, just an empire fading like fog for never understanding the power of a single word, numb. Renee never retaliated, never paid a price. She refused to stay silent. And that alone was enough to shake the system. Her legacy wouldn't be in quarterly profits or a successful IPO. Her legacy was that every time a black woman entered a room full of suited men, she did not bow her head. Every time a young person chooses to walk away from a golden opportunity that compromises their values, they don't feel weak for it. The simple truth, dignity isn't something you fight to be granted. It's something you already carry and choose never to surrender. Renee's story ended without fanfare. No parades, no medals, just one image. A woman walking out of the wrong room without letting it change who she was.